There are moments in life when we're faced with a choice that reveals who we truly are. Sometimes that choice comes in the form of a stranger who needs help when no one else will give it. In the frozen mountains of ancient Norway, a giant warrior named Einar the Bear finds a woman left to die in the snow outside his home. She's beaten, bound, and barely breathing. Most men would have walked away. Einar carries her inside. This woman remembers nothing about her past or why someone wanted her dead. But as she heals in his mountain lodge, fragments of memory return. She begins to remember betrayal, a noble family, and a daughter she lost long ago. Einar himself is a man haunted by his own losses. He was once a feared berserker who gave up violence after failing to protect his own family. Now he sees in this mysterious stranger a chance to do what he couldn't do before. As winter deepens around them, these two broken souls begin to heal each other. But what happens when she asks him why he saved her life? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled through the Norwegian peaks, like the voices of forgotten gods, carrying with it the promise of death for any soul foolish enough to venture beyond shelter. High above the tree line, where even the hardiest pine dared not grow, stood a lodge built from massive timber and mountain stone. It was a fortress of solitude, home to a man who had chosen exile over the company of his fellow warriors. Einar Bjornsson, known in his fighting days as Einar the Bear, stood 8 feet tall in his bare feet, with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway and hands that could crush a man's skull as easily as breaking bread. His auburn beard, streaked now with premature silver, fell to his chest in thick braids adorned with simple iron rings. Scars crisscrossed his arms and torso like a map of countless battles, each mark a testament to violence he no longer wished to remember. The morning had begun like every other in his 5 years of mountain exile. He'd risen before dawn, fed the fire that never died in his great hearth, and stepped outside to check his snares. The cold bit through his thick wool tunic and leather vest, but he barely noticed. Cold was an old companion, as familiar as the weight of grief he carried in his chest. But this morning was different. This morning, the snow near his door was disturbed. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal, a deer, perhaps, or a wolf seeking shelter from the storm that had raged through the night. But as he approached the dark shape, half buried in the drift, his warrior's eyes recognized the curve of a human form beneath the white shroud. A woman lay crumpled against his lodge's foundation, her body twisted at angles that spoke of violence. Her wrists bore the angry red marks of rope burns, and her torn clothing, what remained of what had once been fine fabric, was stained with blood both fresh and dried. Someone had bound her and left her here to die. Einar knelt beside her, his massive frame suddenly gentle as he brushed snow from her face. She was young, perhaps 25 summers, with features that spoke of noble birth. High cheekbones, a straight nose, skin that had known comfort before it knew brutality. Her lips were blue with cold, her breathing so shallow it barely disturbed the snow that had settled on her chest. "By Thor's hammer," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. In his solitude, he spoke only to the wind and the mountains, and sometimes to the ghosts that visited him in dreams. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed no more than a child against his strength, though he could feel the solid muscle beneath her torn dress. This was no pampered court lady, but a woman who had known work and hardship. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he carried her inside, and he found himself moving with the careful tenderness he had once used with his own daughter. The lodge's interior reflected its owner's dual nature. The main room was dominated by a stone hearth large enough to roast a whole elk, its flames casting dancing shadows on walls hung with simple tools and cooking implements. But there, mounted above the mantel like a shrine to abandoned fury, hung an enormous battle axe. Its double-headed blade gleamed with oil and care despite years of disuse, and the leather-wrapped handle showed the worn grooves where his hands had gripped it through countless conflicts. He laid the woman on his own, sleeping furs before the fire, then moved with surprising efficiency to gather what he needed. From wooden chests and leather pouches, he retrieved the healing supplies he'd learned to use during his years of warfare. Herbs for fever, salves for wounds, clean cloth for bandages. His hands, capable of such terrible destruction, now worked. With surgeon's precision to assess her injuries, a deep gash ran along her left temple, the blood congealed but still seeping. Bruises mottled her arms, and ribs in patterns that told a story of systematic beating. But it was her hands that made his jaw clench with barely contained rage. The fingertips were torn and bloody, suggesting she had fought desperately against. Whatever fate had brought her here, as he cleaned and dressed her wounds, memories threatened to surface. Other hands, smaller and more delicate, that he had failed to heal. Another woman's voice now silenced forever, that had once called his name with love instead of fear. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of his patient's breathing as it gradually strengthened. "Who are you?" he murmured, not expecting an answer. "And what devils cast you into my path?" He had asked the same question of himself 5 winters ago, when he'd first climbed these slopes with nothing but his axe, a few supplies, and a heart full of poison. The mountain had accepted him without judgment, offering solitude in exchange. Oh, for survival. Now it had delivered this broken stranger to his door, testing his resolve to remain apart from the world's troubles. The woman stirred as he finished bandaging her head wound, a soft moan escaping her cracked lips. Her eyes fluttered open, grey as winter storm clouds, and immediately filled with terror. She tried to struggle upright, but her strength was gone. "Peace," Einar said, his voice carefully modulated to project calm rather than threat. "You are safe. No one will harm you here." She stared at him with the wide-eyed panic of a trapped animal, taking in his massive frame, his scarred face, the weapons hanging on his walls. Her mouth opened as if to scream, but only a harsh whisper emerged. "Please," she managed. "Don't—" "I said peace," he repeated, settling back on his heels to give her space. "I found you dying in the snow. I've tended your wounds. That's all." He gestured toward a clay pitcher nearby. "There's water if you thirst. Broth warming by the fire when you're strong enough." The terror in her eyes began to recede, replaced by confusion. She looked around the lodge, noting its rough comfort, the absence of chains or bonds, the careful distance he maintained. Her gaze lingered on the battle-axe above the mantel, then returned to his face. "Who are you?" she asked, echoing his earlier question. "Einar," he replied simply. "This is my home. You're welcome to stay until you heal." She tried again to sit up, succeeded this time, despite obvious pain. The furs fell away from her shoulders, revealing the full extent of the bruising across her collarbone and chest. Someone had beaten her with methodical cruelty. "I can't—" She pressed a hand to her temple, wincing. "I don't remember—" "Don't. You force it," Einar advised, rising to fetch the promised water. "Head wounds muddle the mind. Memory returns when it will." But even as he spoke the words, he saw something in her face that suggested this was more than simple confusion from injury. The blankness in her storm-grey eyes spoke of memories stolen rather than simply scattered. Outside, the wind continued its lonely song through the peaks, and Einar found himself wondering what forces had conspired to bring this mysterious woman to his threshold. In 5 years of solitude, the only visitors to his mountain refuge had been the occasional lost traveler or wounded animal. Now, on a morning no different from 1,000 others, his hermit's life had been shattered by the arrival of someone who clearly carried secrets worth killing for. He handed her the water cup, noting how her fingers trembled as she accepted it. Not from cold now, but from whatever memories lurked beneath the surface of her damaged mind. "Rest," he told her. "Questions can wait until you're stronger." But as he watched her sip the water and settle back among his sleeping furs, Einar knew that rest would be a luxury for both of them. The rope marks on her wrists, the quality of her torn clothing, the calculated nature of her injuries, all spoke of a conflict that stretched far beyond his mountain sanctuary. He had sought peace. In these heights, redemption through solitude. Instead, the fates had delivered war to his very doorstep, wrapped in the form of a woman whose forgotten past might destroy them both. 3 days passed before the woman was strong enough to speak more than a few words at a time. Einar maintained his respectful distance, bringing her meals and fresh bandages, checking her wounds with the impersonal efficiency of a field medic. But he noticed everything, how she startled at sudden sounds, how her eyes tracked every shadow, how her hand instinctively moved to her throat whenever she thought he wasn't looking. On the 4th morning, she managed to sit upright without assistance. Einar found her examining something clutched in her palm, a scrap of fabric he hadn't noticed before, torn and stained but clearly made from fine material. The weave was tight and even, dyed a deep blue that spoke of wealth and status. Most intriguing was the partial symbol embroidered in gold thread along one edge, part of what appeared to be a family crest. "You were holding this when I found you," Einar observed, settling onto a wooden stool across the fire from her. "Do you recognize it?" She held the fabric up to catch the firelight, studying the partial emblem with furrowed brows. "It feels familiar," she said slowly, "but like trying to grasp smoke, the harder I reach for the memory, the more it slips away." Her voice had grown stronger over the past days, revealing an accent that confirmed Einar's suspicions about her noble birth. She spoke with the measured cadence of someone educated in court manners, though pain and confusion had stripped away any pretense. "What's the last thing you remember clearly?" he asked. She closed her eyes, concentrating. Cold, terrible cold, and pain. Someone shouting, angry voices. Then nothing until I woke here. She opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "You saved my life. I did what any decent person would do." "Did you?" She studied his scarred face with surprising directness. Most men wouldn't bring a stranger into their home, especially not someone who might bring trouble. Einar felt the weight of her grey gaze and found himself uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "What makes you think you bring trouble?" She held up the fabric scrap. "This. The way I was beaten. The ropes." She touched her wrists where the marks were fading from angry red to purple. "Someone wanted me dead, but they wanted me to suffer first. That kind of cruelty doesn't come from simple bandits." Her assessment was accurate and troubling. Einar had seen enough violence to recognize the difference between desperate thieves and calculated brutality. Whoever had done this to her possessed both resources and deep hatred. "You could leave," he said quietly. "When you're stronger, find your way to a village, seek help from whom?" she interrupted. "I don't even know my own name. I could walk into the very arms of whoever tried to kill me." She set the fabric aside and pulled his sleeping furs more tightly around her shoulders. "Unless you're trying to be rid of me." The question hung between them like smoke from the fire. Einar found himself studying her face. The determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. In the past days, her presence had changed something fundamental about his mountain. Refuge. The silence no longer felt peaceful, but expectant. The solitude he had cultivated now seemed less like healing and more like hiding. "No," he said finally. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Relief flickered across her features. "Thank you. I know this isn't easy for you. Having someone disrupting your peace." Peace. Einar tasted the word like something foreign. "Is that what you think I have here? Don't you?" She leaned forward slightly. "This place, your isolation, it feels like a man trying to outrun something. What are you hiding from, Einar the Bear?" The name hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 5 years, had almost convinced himself it belonged. "To someone else entirely. How do you know that name?" he asked, his voice suddenly dangerous. She blinked, seeming surprised by her own words. I don't know. It just came to me when I looked at you, Einar the Bear. Is that what they called you? Once. He rose from the stool, moving to stir the pot of stew hanging over the fire. The familiar task helped steady his hands. Before I came here, before I chose a different path. What kind of path? Her voice was gentle but persistent. The way you move, the scars, the weapons on your walls. You were a warrior. A famous one, if names like the Bear follow you even into exile. Einar ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls, using the time to choose his words. He had spent 5 years in silence, speaking to no one about the weight he carried. Now this nameless woman was drawing confessions from him, like water from a well. I was a berserker, he said, handing her a bowl. I served jarls and kings, led raids across the northern seas. Men feared my name and crossed themselves when I passed. He settled back onto his stool. I told myself I fought for honor, for glory, for the good of my people. But mostly I fought because I was very good at killing, and killing paid well. She ate slowly, watching his face. What changed? The question he had been dreading. The wound that 5 years of mountain solitude hadn't managed to heal. I had a family, he said simply. A wife, Sigrid, a daughter, Astrid. They lived in a coastal village while I was away on campaigns. I thought distance would keep them safe from the enemies I'd made. He stared into his bowl, seeing not stew, but the ashes of his former life. I was wrong. The woman, he found himself, wishing desperately that she would remember her name, set down her spoon. What happened? Raiders came in winter when I was fighting in Ireland. They burned the village, killed everyone they couldn't carry off as slaves. His voice remained steady, but his hands clenched into fists. I returned to find my home destroyed, my family. He couldn't finish the sentence. Even after all these years, the words caught in his throat like broken glass. I'm sorry, she whispered. I hunted the raiders for 2 years. Found them all, killed them in ways that would have made other berserkers sick to watch. But it changed nothing. My family was still gone. The rage was still eating me alive like poison. He met her eyes. So I came here, hung up my axe, took vows of peace, thought if I could stop killing, maybe I could stop hurting. And has it worked? Einar considered the question. Some days. But then I find a beaten woman in my snow, and the old anger wakes up. Part of me wants to hunt down whoever hurt you and show them what berserker fury really means. But you won't. No, he said firmly. That path leads only to more death. I chose peace, and I'll keep that choice even if it kills me. She nodded slowly, then surprised him by reaching across the space between them to touch his hand. Her fingers were warm from the bowl, and he realized it was the first time in 5 years that another human being had touched him with kindness. Maybe, she said softly, some choices aren't meant to be kept forever. Maybe peace isn't about never. Of fighting, maybe it's about fighting for the right reasons. Before he could respond, she pulled her hand back and returned to her meal. But the warmth of her touch lingered on his skin, and with it a dangerous thought that perhaps his exile had been less about finding peace and more about hiding from the possibility of caring for someone again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the lodge's shutters. Winter storms in these mountains could last for days, trapping travelers and testing the survival skills of even the most experienced mountaineers. But for the first time since arriving in these heights, Einar found himself grateful for the isolation. Whatever forces had marked this woman for death, they would have to wait for the storms to clear before they could follow her trail to his door. The fabric scrap lay forgotten on the furs between them, its gold embroidery catching the firelight, like a promise or a threat. Soon he knew that fragment of her past would demand answers. Soon, the peace he had built in these mountains would be tested by the violence she had escaped. But tonight, with the storm howling outside and the fire warm between them, Einar allowed himself to simply enjoy the sound of another human voice. In his home, Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, he had saved a life, and perhaps that was enough. The storm raged for 3 more days, sealing them inside the lodge as effectively as any fortress walls. During those long hours, the woman's strength gradually returned, and with it came fragments of memory that arrived like pieces of a shattered mirror, sharp, disconnected, and often painful to examine. It was while helping Einar organize his stores of dried meat and preserved vegetables that she found it. Her hand brushed against something small and hard, wrapped in the torn remains of her dress, something that had escaped his notice during his initial examination of her injuries. She pulled it free with trembling fingers. A small wooden doll, no larger than her palm, carved with loving detail. The moment her eyes fell upon the tiny figure, she gasped and sank to her knees as if struck by lightning. The doll was exquisitely crafted, with a painted face that showed rosy cheeks and bright blue eyes. Its hair was made from real flax, braided with miniature ribbons, and its dress was sewn from scraps of the same blue fabric as the torn cloak. "A fragment. A child," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I had a child." Einar moved to her side immediately, his large frame folding down beside her with surprising grace. "Tell me what you remember." Small hands reaching for me, a voice calling Mama in the dark. The memories came in rushing waves now, each one bringing fresh pain. She was so little, maybe 4 summers old. Golden hair like spun sunlight, and she laughed. Oh, how she laughed. The woman clutched the doll to her chest. "Someone took her from me. I can see shadows, hear shouting, but the faces won't come clear." The raw anguish in her voice struck Einar like a physical blow. He knew that particular grief intimately, the hollow ache of a parent separated from their child, his own daughter's. Face rose, unbidden in his memory, and for a moment he was back in that burned village, searching desperately through the ashes for some sign of his little Astrid. "She had a name," the woman continued, rocking slightly as she held the doll. "It's right there, just beyond my reach. Something beautiful, something that meant hope." She looked up at Einar with desperate eyes. "Why can't I remember my own daughter's name?" "Because remembering hurts," Einar said softly. "The mind protects us from pain too great to bear. I couldn't speak my daughter's name for 2 years after I lost her." "Your daughter, what was she called?" "Astrid." The name came easier now, though. It still carried weight. "Astrid, Einar's daughter. She would have been 9 summers this past harvest." The woman nodded, understanding passing between them without need for words. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, 2 broken parents sharing the weight of loss. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, but the lodge felt warmer somehow, filled with the presence of children who lived now only in memory. "She loved stories," the woman said eventually. "My daughter. I can remember tucking her into bed, telling her tales of brave princesses and magical kingdoms. She would make me tell the same ones over and over until I knew every word by heart." A sad smile crossed her face. "I made this doll for her, carved it myself during the long winter nights. She never went anywhere without it." "Then why do you have it?" Einar asked gently. The smile faded as she considered the question. I think I was bringing it to her, taking it somewhere she was being kept." She pressed the doll to her forehead, as if trying to absorb its memories. "There was a journey, a carriage, men with swords who spoke in harsh whispers." Her voice grew troubled. "I was going to see her, but someone didn't want that to happen." "Who? Would separate a mother from her child? Someone who wanted to control me." The words came out with sudden certainty. "My daughter was leverage, a way to ensure my cooperation. But cooperation with what?" Before Einar could respond, she was struck by another wave of memory. Her eyes widened as images flashed through her mind. A great hall filled with armed men, herself standing before a massive oak throne, words being spoken that made her blood run cold. "Marriage," she gasped. "They wanted me to marry someone, a political alliance. I refused and they—" She shuddered. "They said I would agree once I understood what was at stake. They showed me a lock of golden hair and told me my daughter would remain safe as long as I obeyed. Einar felt the familiar fire of rage building in his chest. The casual cruelty of using a child as a bargaining piece awakened every protective instinct he possessed. Who were these men? I can't see their faces clearly, but I remember banners, red and gold, with a wolf's head device. And there was a name, Jarl Grim something. Grim Wolf? She shook her head in frustration. It's all Fragments. Jarl Grimwald, Einar said grimly. I know the name. He holds lands south of here, near the coastal settlements. His clan has grown powerful through strategic marriages and ruthless politics. He studied her face carefully. If he wanted you as a bride, it means your family has something he needs, land, wealth, or political connections. Then I must be highborn. She looked down at her hands, noting the calluses that spoke of work, but also the softer patches that suggested a life of privilege. But why can't I remember my own name, my own family? Sometimes the mind locks away what it cannot bear to face. Einar had seen it before, among warriors who had endured too much trauma. Perhaps remembering who you are means remembering what you've lost. She nodded slowly, then carefully tucked the wooden doll into her bodice, close to her heart. Whatever my name, whatever my past, one thing is clear. I have a daughter who needs me. She's being held prisoner to ensure my compliance with this marriage, and I failed her by trying to run instead of fight. You didn't fail anyone, Einar said firmly. You were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. Sometimes retreat is the only option that keeps hope alive. Hope. She tasted the word like something foreign. Is that what this is? This hollow ache in my chest? It's what keeps us breathing, when everything else tells us to stop. Einar rose and moved to the fire, adding another log to keep the flames. I lost hope for 2 years after my family died, thought I would carry that emptiness forever. But hope has a way of surprising us. Sometimes it comes disguised as a stranger left to die in the snow. She looked up at him with new understanding. You see her in me, don't you? Your daughter. Not physically. Astrid had dark hair and her mother's green eyes, but something about your courage, your refusal to give up even when everything seems lost. Yes, I see something of her in you, and I see the father you must have been, she replied softly. Patient, protective, willing to sacrifice everything for those you love. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Einar knew he was walking a precipice. Allowing himself to care again meant opening himself to loss again. But as he watched this brave woman hold her daughter's doll and speak of hope in the darkness, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years, the desire to fight for someone other than himself. When the storm breaks, she said quietly, I'll have to leave. I can't put you in danger by staying. When the storm breaks, Einar replied, we'll decide together what comes next. You're not facing this alone anymore. Outside, the wind began to quiet, and both of them knew that soon decisions would have to be made. But for now, they had each other's company, the warmth of the fire, and the fragile, growing hope that perhaps some losses could be redeemed. The storm finally broke on the 7th day, leaving behind a world transformed by pristine snow and crystalline air. The woman was strong enough now to venture outside the lodge, though she stayed close to Einar as they walked the perimeter of his mountain refuge. Her legs were unsteady after days of bed rest, but her spirit seemed renewed by the crisp mountain air and endless vista of peaks stretching toward the horizon. It was during her inspection of the torn dress she had worn upon arrival that she made another discovery. While examining the garment for anything that might be salvaged, her fingers found a small tear in the fabric near the neckline, not damage from her assault, but a deliberate slit designed to hide something precious. Einar, she called softly, drawing his attention from where he was splitting firewood. There's something here. She worked the fabric carefully until a small object dropped into her palm. A silver pendant hung on a delicate chain. The pendant itself was unremarkable at first glance, no larger than a silver coin, but when she turned it over in the firelight, intricate runic inscriptions became visible around its circumference. "Can you read these?" she asked, holding it out to him. Einar set down his axe and accepted the pendant, studying the ancient symbols with furrowed brows. "Some of them. My father taught me to read the old script when I was young, though I'm far from expert." He traced one symbol with his fingertip. "This looks like a name rune, but the script is older than what's commonly used now. Could it be my name? Perhaps. Or a family name. Ancestral markings." He held the pendant up to catch the light better. "There are other symbols here, markers of lineage, I think. Noble houses often use such things to identify their bloodlines." She accepted the pendant back and fastened it around her neck, where it settled against her collarbone like it belonged there. The moment the silver touched her skin, she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if some missing piece of herself had been restored. "It feels familiar," she murmured. "Like I've worn it all my life. Hidden jewelry, noble bearing, political marriage plots. You're clearly from a powerful family." Einar resumed his wood-splitting, but she noticed how his eyes kept returning to her face as if searching for clues. "The question is which family, and why someone wants you dead." Over the following days, they established new routines that felt surprisingly natural. She helped with cooking and mending, tasks that came to her hands as if remembered by muscle rather than mind. Her skill with needle and thread suggested education befitting a noble daughter, but her knowledge of herb lore and healing spoke of practical experience that went beyond courtly accomplishments. Einar taught her the skills necessary for mountain survival, how to read weather patterns in cloud formations, which plants could provide sustenance in winter, how to move quietly through snow without leaving obvious tracks. She proved an apt student, absorbing his lessons with the focused attention of someone who understood that knowledge might mean the difference between life and death. "You learn quickly," he observed one afternoon, as she successfully demonstrated how to set snares for small game. "Most court-raised women would struggle with such practical skills. Perhaps I wasn't always court-raised," she replied thoughtfully. "Some of these things feel familiar, like I learned them long ago and I'm just remembering." Their conversations, during these lessons, revealed more about both their characters. She possessed a quick wit and a dry sense of humor that emerged as her confidence grew. He found himself laughing more than he had in years, drawn out of his brooding solitude by her gentle teasing and insightful observations about everything from the behavior of mountain wildlife to the stories told by the patterns of stars overhead. But it was during the quiet evening hours that their deepest conversations took place. Sitting before the fire after the day's work was done, they shared memories and fears with the honesty that comes from knowing each other only in the present, unburdened by the weight of past reputation or expectation. "Do you think she's still alive?" the woman asked one night, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the wooden doll she now kept in a small pouch at her waist. "My daughter, wherever she's being held, do you think they would keep her safe?" Einar said firmly. "She's no use to them as a threat if she's harmed. Cruel men like Jarl Grimwald understand leverage. Your daughter is more valuable to them alive and well than as a martyr." "You sound very certain. I've known men like him. They're brutal when it serves their purposes, but they're not mindlessly violent. Everything they do is calculated to achieve maximum advantage." He poked at the fire with an iron rod, sending sparks spiraling up toward the smoke hole. "Your daughter is being kept comfortable, probably told stories about how her mother will return soon if she's a good girl and doesn't cause trouble." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief rather than despair. "Thank you. I needed to hear that. The real question," Einar continued, "is what happens when spring comes and travel becomes easier. They'll expect some response to their ultimatum. When you don't return to accept the marriage, they'll send men to discover what became of you. Will they be able to track me here? Eventually. I've covered our tracks as best I can, but a determined search will find traces. This lodge isn't invisible, just remote and difficult to reach." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new note of determination. "Then I need to remember who I am before they arrive. I need to understand what resources I have, what allies might aid me, what weapons I can bring to bear against men who would steal children and force marriages. And if your memories don't return in time, then I'll face them with whatever strength I have." She looked at him directly. "I won't run again, Einar. My daughter has been prisoner long enough because of my failures. When they come for me, and they will come, I'll be ready to fight for her." The firelight played across her face, highlighting the determined set of her jaw and the fierce protectiveness in her grey eyes. In that moment, Einar saw not the broken woman he'd found dying in the snow, but a warrior preparing for battle. The transformation was remarkable and deeply troubling, because he recognized the look in her eyes as the same one he'd worn when he'd set out to hunt his family's killers. "Fighting and winning are different things," he said quietly. "Jarl, Grimwald has resources you can't match. Armed men, political connections, the backing of other nobles who benefit from his alliances. Then I'll have to be smarter than I am strong. And if being smart isn't enough," she was quiet for a long time before answering, "then at least my daughter will know I died trying to save her instead of abandoning her to save myself." That night, as Einar lay on his sleeping furs and listened to her quiet breathing from across the fire, he found himself facing a choice he had hoped never to confront again. He had sworn off violence, built a life of solitude and peace in these mountains. But the woman sleeping beside his hearth was preparing to walk into a battle she couldn't possibly win alone. Tomorrow, he would begin teaching her to fight with more than just determination. If she was truly committed to facing her enemies, she would need every advantage he could give her, including perhaps the one thing he had sworn never to offer again: the terrible skills of Einar the Bear. Winter's grip began to loosen as the days grew longer and the mountain passes started to show patches of bare earth between the snowdrifts. With the changing season came new discoveries that would reshape everything they thought they understood about the woman's past and the forces arrayed against them. She was helping Einar organize his few possessions when she discovered something else hidden in the layers of her torn clothing. A piece of parchment, folded small and pressed flat against the inner lining of her bodice. The ink had run in places from moisture and blood, but enough remained legible to reveal its significance. "It's a map," she breathed, spreading the document carefully on Einar's wooden table. "Look, these are the territories south of here, the coastal settlements." Einar leaned over her shoulder to study the crude cartography. The map showed familiar landmarks, river crossings, mountain passes, the locations of various settlements and strongholds. But what made his blood run cold were the marks someone had made in red ink across the parchment's surface. "These crosses," he said, pointing to symbols scattered across the map, "they mark noble estates, family seats of power." His finger traced a line connecting several of the marked locations, and this route, it runs between them like a planned journey. "I was traveling this path," she said with growing certainty, "but not alone. Look here." She indicated numbers written beside some of the crosses. These could be troop strengths, garrison numbers. Someone was planning military movements. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a map, it was intelligence. The kind of detailed information that could shift the balance of power between rival noble houses. If she had been carrying such documents, she was far more than simply an unwilling bride in a political marriage. "There's more," she said, turning the map over. On the reverse side, someone had written names in a careful script, along with what appeared to be dates and locations. "Jarl Grimwald is here, but so are others. Jarl Sverker, Lady Ingrid of Nordmark, Baron Ulf the Red." She looked up at Einar with dawning realization. These aren't just random nobles. They're all connected somehow. Einar recognized several of the names, powerful figures in regional politics, men and women whose alliances could determine the fate of entire kingdoms. "This reads like a conspiracy," he said grimly, "a coordinated effort among multiple noble houses. But a conspiracy to do what?" Before he could answer, movement outside the lodge caught his attention. Through the partially opened shutters, he could see figures moving in the tree line below, distant riders picking their way carefully up the mountain path. His warrior instincts, dormant for 5 years, suddenly blazed to full alertness. "We have company," he said quietly, moving to the window for a better view. The woman joined him, peering through the gap in the shutters. Even at this distance, they could make out at least 6 mounted men, their dark cloaks stark against the snow. They moved with the purposeful confidence of a military patrol, following what appeared to be a well-planned route. "Do you think they're looking for me?" she whispered. "Maybe, or they could be ordinary travelers." But even as he said it, Einar knew better. The way they moved, the care with which they searched the terrain, the weapons visible even at this distance, these were not merchants or pilgrims. As they watched, the riders paused at a clearing roughly halfway up the mountain slope. One of them dismounted and began examining the ground, clearly looking for signs of passage. Another pointed toward the lodge, though it was partially concealed by trees and rocky outcroppings. "They're tracking someone," Einar observed, "and they're good at it." The woman's hand moved instinctively to the map spread on the table behind them. "If they're Grimwald's men, then they've been searching for you since the storm cleared." Einar moved away from the window and began gathering supplies with efficient haste. "We need to assume they'll reach this lodge within the hour. Should we run? Where?" He gestured toward the peaks surrounding them. "This is the only structure for 20 miles in any direction. In this terrain, on foot, they'd run us down before sunset." He pulled his battle axe down from its mounting above the mantle, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. "Sometimes the only way out is through." The woman stared at the weapon, understanding the implication of his words. "You swore off violence." "I swore to find peace." He tested the axe's edge with his thumb, drawing a thin line of blood. "But peace isn't always possible when evil men threaten innocent lives. I won't be the reason you break your oath." "You're not." Einar met her eyes with grim resolve. "I'm choosing to break it because some things matter more than personal vows. Your daughter needs her mother. That matters more than my need for redemption." She was quiet for a moment, then moved to the table where the map lay open. With swift, decisive movements, she folded the document and secured it in her bodice. "If these men are part of the same conspiracy that took my daughter, then this map might be the key to finding her, or it might be what gets us both killed. Then we'd better make sure we're not easy prey." She looked around the lodge, taking inventory of potential weapons and defensive positions. "You know this terrain, and you know how to fight. What do you need from me?" The transformation in her demeanor was remarkable. Gone was any trace of the helpless victim he'd found in the snow. In her place stood a woman prepared for war, her grey eyes sharp with tactical awareness and deadly resolve. "Can you use a bow?" he asked. "I think so. My hands know the motion, even if my mind doesn't remember learning it." Einar retrieved a hunting bow from his supplies, along with a quiver of iron-tipped arrows. "Stay here. Cover the approaches. If any of them get past me—" "They won't," she said with surprising confidence. "I've seen you move, seen the way you think about terrain and tactics. Those men are hunting a helpless woman and an isolated hermit. They're not prepared to face Einar the Bear." The name still carried power, even spoken in her gentle voice. For the first time in 5 years, Einar felt the familiar surge of battle readiness flooding through his veins. Not the mindless fury of his berserker days, but the cold, calculated violence of a warrior defending something precious. "When this is over," he said, shouldering his axe, "we'll need to talk about what comes next. Those men aren't working alone, and killing them will only bring more." "I know." She knocked an arrow and moved to the window. "But first, we survive this fight. Then we plan the next one." Outside, the riders had resumed their approach, growing larger and more distinct with each passing minute. Einar could see their faces now, hard men with the scars and bearing of professional soldiers. They wore no obvious clan colors, but their equipment was too good for simple bandits. As he prepared to step outside and meet them, the woman called his name softly. Einar. When he turned, she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Thank you. For everything. Whatever happens next, you gave me back my life when you could have let me die in the snow. Thank me when we're both still. Breathing tomorrow, he replied. Then, with the grim smile of a man embracing his true nature, Einar the Bear stepped out into the mountain air to remind the world why some names are spoken in whispers. The confrontation with the riders ended, more quietly than either Einar or the woman had expected. When the 6 armed men finally reached the lodge, they found not a helpless hermit and his guest, but a giant warrior standing in his doorway with a battle-axe across his shoulders and the unmistakable bearing of someone who had killed many men and was prepared to kill more. The leader of the group, a scarred veteran with intelligent eyes, took one look at Einar and called a halt 20 paces from the lodge. A brief, tense negotiation followed. Questions about missing travelers, assurances that they meant no harm, and the careful dance of armed men trying to determine each other's intentions without triggering bloodshed. In the end, they departed, with polite words and lingering glances, but not before Einar had memorized every face and noted how they studied the terrain around his home. The woman, watching from the window with her bow ready, saw something else. One of the men had a small leather pouch hanging from his belt, and when he moved a certain way, she caught a glimpse of what looked like golden hair tied with a ribbon. "They have something that belongs to me," she said after the riders disappeared down the mountain path. "What did you see?" "A lock of hair, child's hair, the same color as—" She pressed her hand to the wooden doll in her pouch. "They're carrying a token from my daughter, proof that they have her." Einar set his axe aside and moved to where she stood. "That changes things. They weren't just searching randomly. They were sent with specific evidence, probably to show you what's at stake if you continue to resist." That evening, by the light of oil lamps and the crackling fire, they spread the blood-stained map on the table and began to decipher its secrets in earnest. The woman's growing confidence with her recovered memories, combined with Einar's knowledge of regional politics, allowed them to piece together a picture that was both complex and terrifying. "Look at this pattern," she said, tracing connections between the marked locations. "These aren't just noble houses. They're all families that have marriageable daughters or recently widowed ladies of property. A coordinated campaign of strategic marriages," Einar realized. Someone is building a network of alliances that would give them unprecedented power across the Northern Territories. And I was meant to be part of it. Her finger found her own name written in the margin beside a date that had already passed. My marriage to Jarl Grimwald wasn't just about uniting 2 families. It was about completing a chain of influence that stretches from the coastal settlements to the mountain kingdoms. The implications were staggering. If successful, such a conspiracy could effectively control trade routes, military movements, and political decisions across vast swaths of territory. It was the kind of long-term strategic thinking that could reshape the balance of power for generations. But who's coordinating all this? Einar asked. Grimwald is ambitious, but he's not clever enough to orchestrate something this complex. The woman studied the names more carefully, looking for patterns in the handwriting and organization of information. "Here," she said suddenly, pointing to a series of notations in a different script. These additions were made by someone else, someone with access to military intelligence and court gossip from multiple kingdoms. As she spoke, more memories began to surface, triggered by the familiar sight of the careful script and organized information. She could see herself in a great hall, listening to heated discussions about trade agreements and inheritance laws. She remembered the faces of advisors and scribes, the intricate web of relationships that bound the noble houses together. "I was there," she whispered. "Not as a victim, but as a participant. I was part of these negotiations, these political arrangements." Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. "I wasn't just being forced into a marriage. I was helping plan multiple marriages, including my own." "Then what changed? Why were you running away instead of going through with the ceremony?" "Because I learned something." The memory came flooding, back with painful clarity. "During the negotiations, I discovered that the marriages weren't the end goal. They were just the first step. Once the alliances were in place, there was to be a coordinated campaign against the smaller independent settlements, absorbing their lands and resources under the guise of protecting them from raiders and bandits." Einar's jaw tightened as he understood the full scope of the conspiracy. Conquest disguised as marriage politics. Exactly. And the children, all the children born from these unions, including my daughter, were to be raised as hostages to ensure continued cooperation from their families. She touched the wooden doll again. "My daughter wasn't just being held to force my compliance with one marriage. She was meant to be a permanent guarantee of my family's loyalty to whatever power structure emerged from this conspiracy." "So you ran." "I tried to. I stole the map, gathered what evidence I could, and attempted to escape to warn the threatened settlements." Her expression darkened. "Obviously, I didn't succeed. They caught me before I could reach safety, and they would have killed me if not for your intervention." Einar was quiet for a long moment, processing the enormity of what she had revealed. "If what you're saying is true, then your daughter isn't just a hostage. She's a key piece in a game that involves multiple kingdoms. Getting her back won't be a simple rescue mission." "I know." She folded the map carefully and returned it to its hiding place. "But I also know something they don't expect. I remember now. I remember who I am, what resources I have, and more importantly, I remember every detail of their plans." "Who are you?" Einar asked quietly. She straightened, and for the first time since he'd found her in the snow, she carried herself with the full authority of her birthright. "I am Astrid Bjornsdottir, daughter of Jarl Bjorn the Wise, keeper of the mountain passes, and guardian of the northern trade routes." Her grey eyes met his steadily. "And I am the key to unraveling this entire conspiracy, if I can stay alive. Long enough to use what I know." The name hit Einar like a physical blow. Astrid, his own daughter's name. The woman he had been protecting, growing to care for, even allowing himself to love, bore the same name as the child he had lost. The symmetry was too perfect, too painful to be mere coincidence. "Astrid," he repeated, tasting the familiar syllables. "I know it's the same name as your daughter," she said gently. "I could see the recognition in your eyes. Is that why you saved me? Because I reminded you of her?" "At first, perhaps." He met her gaze honestly, "but not anymore. Now I want to help you because of who you are, not who you remind me of." Outside, the mountain wind was picking up again, promising another storm. But inside the lodge, two people, who had found each other in the depths of winter, were preparing for a campaign that would test everything they had learned about trust, courage, and the price of protecting those they loved. "When spring comes," Astrid said, "we'll need to move quickly. Those men will report back that you're here, and they'll return in greater numbers. We have perhaps a month before the passes are clear enough for a major expedition. Then we'd better spend that month preparing for war," Einar replied. "Because if you're right about the scope of this conspiracy, we're not just fighting to save your daughter. We're fighting to prevent the conquest of everything north of the Great River." As if summoned by his words, the pendant around her neck caught the firelight, its runic inscriptions seeming to glow with ancient authority. The blood-stained map in her bodice carried the secrets of their enemies. The wooden doll in her pouch held the memory of what they were fighting for. Tomorrow they would begin planning their campaign against forces that commanded armies and treasuries. Tonight they had each other, and the growing certainty that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. 3 weeks after the riders' departure, Einar discovered something that would transform their understanding of the conspiracy from dangerous to personally devastating. He had been checking his hunting snares in the lower slopes when he found the abandoned camp, a hastily vacated site where the riders had obviously spent several days observing his lodge from concealment. Most of the camp had been thoroughly cleaned, but desperate men make mistakes. Hidden beneath a pile of stones that had served as a makeshift fire ring, Einar found a partially burned letter fragment. The parchment was expensive, the script elegant, and what remained of the message made his blood freeze in his veins. He read it 3 times before climbing back to the lodge, each reading confirming what his mind refused to accept. Astrid was tending the fire when he entered, humming softly, a sound that had become precious to him over these weeks of growing companionship. When she saw his expression, the melody died on her lips. "What is it?" she asked, rising immediately. Without speaking, he handed her the burned fragment. She read it silently, her face growing pale as the implications became clear. "My Lord Grimwald," the legible portion began. "The woman Astrid remains missing, presumed dead in the mountain passes. However, our search has revealed something of greater import. The giant who dwells in the High Lodge is none other than Einar. Bjornsson, the berserker called the Bear. 5 years passed. Our raids against the coastal settlements included the burning of his village. His wife and daughter perished in that action, though we did not know his identity at the time. If he discovers this connection, he will become more than merely an obstacle. He will become an instrument of our destruction. The child we hold grows restless and asks daily for her mother. She has her father's eyes and speaks often of the big man with kind hands who used to carry her on his shoulders. I fear we may have..." The rest was ash and illegible fragments. Astrid's hands shook as she lowered the letter. "Your family, they were killed by Grimwald's men, and my daughter..." She pressed her hand to her mouth, horror and understanding warring in her expression. "She remembers me," Einar said quietly. "According to this letter, your daughter remembers me. That's impossible. You said your daughter died 5 years ago. My daughter is only 4 summers old. She couldn't..." Astrid stopped speaking as the terrible truth assembled itself in her mind. "Unless she isn't my daughter by birth." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of logs in the fireplace. 2 people who had found healing in each other's company now faced the possibility that their connection ran deeper and more tragic than either had imagined. "The timeline fits," Einar said, his voice carefully controlled. 5 years ago, my daughter Astrid would have been 4 years old. The right age, the right coloring. If she survived the raid, if they took her as a valuable hostage rather than killing her, they would have needed a believable story to explain her presence. Astrid finished. A noble family's lost daughter, conveniently discovered and raised as their ward until a suitable political use could be found. And when they needed leverage against you, they presented her as your own child, counting on maternal instinct to override questions about bloodline. Astrid sank into a chair, the wooden doll falling from nerveless fingers to land on the floor between them. "I loved her," she whispered. "From the moment they brought her to me, I loved her as if she were my own flesh. She called me mother, and I never questioned it. The timeline of my own memories is so fractured I accepted their explanation that she was mine. The hair color, the age, even the name. They chose her specifically because she could pass for your daughter." Einar picked up the fallen doll, studying its painted features with new eyes. "This was made for my Astrid. She carried it everywhere, just as the letter describes. Then the daughter I've been fighting to save isn't even mine." The words came out flat, emotionless, as if speaking them without feeling might make them hurt less. "Does that matter?" Einar asked. The question hung between them like a sword blade. Astrid looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and saw in his eyes the same anguish she felt in her own heart. "She's been calling strangers mother and father for 5 years," she said. "She's forgotten her real parents, forgotten her true name. The men who destroyed your family stole your daughter and used my love for her to control me. But you do love her." "Yes." The word came out fierce and certain. "She's not mine by blood, but she's mine in every way that matters. I've sung her to sleep, tended her hurts, told her stories, and promised her I would always protect her." Astrid stood, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "And you have a daughter who is alive, who has been waiting for rescue for 5 years. A daughter who doesn't remember me, who thinks the people who killed her mother are her family. A daughter who still asks for the big man with kind hands," Astrid corrected. "Children don't forget love, Einar. They may forget faces and names, but they remember being safe, being cherished. According to that letter, some part of her still remembers you." The revelation transformed everything about their situation. This was no longer a matter of political conspiracy and forced marriage. This was personal vengeance. 5 years in the making. Grimwald's men hadn't just destroyed Einar's family. They had stolen his surviving daughter and used her as a weapon against another innocent woman. "They knew," Einar said, his voice growing dangerous. "When those riders came here, they knew exactly who I was. They were testing me, seeing if I recognized the connection, which means they'll be prepared for you when we come for her. Let them prepare." The old berserker fury was waking in his eyes, cold and implacable. "They've had 5 years to enjoy their victory over my family. They've used my daughter as a pawn in their games, made her love the very people who destroyed her." Real life. He picked up his battle axe from where it leaned against the wall. "I spent 5 years learning to live with their escape from justice. I won't spend another day allowing them to profit from my daughter's captivity." "Our daughter," Astrid corrected, softly. "She may not be mine by blood, but I've been her mother for 2 years. I won't abandon her now just because I've learned the truth about her birth." Einar looked at her with new understanding. "You're saying you want to rescue her together?" "I'm saying that little girl has already lost one mother to these monsters. I won't let her lose another." Astrid retrieved the letter fragment and studied it again. "Besides, we each have something the other needs. You have the skills to fight them. I have the knowledge of their plans and the political connections to ensure they face justice for more than just personal crimes. And if we succeed, if we save her and destroy the conspiracy, what then?" Astrid was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "Then we give her the choice," she said finally. "We tell her the truth about her parentage, about what happened to her birth mother, about the years she's lost. And we let her decide whether she wants to remember being your daughter or continue being mine, or both, or both." She smiled through her tears. Strange families have worked before. Outside, the mountain wind carried the promise of spring, and with it the approach of a campaign season that would test everything they had learned about love, loss, and the bonds that tie human hearts together. But inside the lodge, 2 people who had found each other in winter's depths were discovering that some connections run deeper than circumstance or chance. They were no longer just allies preparing for battle. They were a family preparing to reclaim their stolen child. The discovery of their daughter's true identity unleashed a transformation in both Einar and Astrid that went far beyond mere preparation for battle. In the days that followed, the mountain lodge became a war camp, where strategy, emotion, and desperate hope mingled with the methodical preparation of weapons and supplies. From a wooden chest that had remained sealed for 5 years, Einar retrieved his father's war horn, a massive instrument carved from the horn of an ancient auroch and bound with iron rings inscribed with runes of victory. The horn had rallied warriors across 3 generations of his family, calling them to battles that had shaped the political landscape of the Northern Territories. "My grandfather carried this at the Battle of Frozen Ford," he told Astrid, as he polished the ancient artifact with oil and reverence. "My father sounded it during the siege of Ironhold Keep. It has never called men to a cause that was lost. And now you'll use it to call them to save a child," she observed, watching his careful ministrations. "To save our child," he corrected, "and to destroy the men who have profited from her captivity." The horn's recovery marked the beginning of Einar's complete embrace of his warrior heritage. He retrieved weapons that had been stored in oil-soaked cloth, tested the edges of blades that had tasted the blood of his enemies, and began the physical and mental conditioning that would transform him from mountain hermit back into the berserker, who had once been the most feared warrior in the northern lands. But this transformation was different from his younger days of mindless battle rage. Now his preparation was tempered by purpose, guided by the tactical intelligence that Astrid brought to their planning. Together, they studied the blood-stained map and developed a strategy that would accomplish multiple objectives: rescue their daughter, expose the broader conspiracy, and ensure that Grimwald and his allies faced justice for their crimes. "We can't simply storm his stronghold," Astrid explained, as they reviewed potential approaches to Grimwald's lands. "He'll have anticipated that response, especially now that he knows you're involved. We need to be subtler, more strategic. I'm not known for subtlety, but I am." She traced a finger along the map's marked routes. "Before I learned the true scope of their conspiracy, I was part of their inner circle. I know their communication methods, their meeting schedules, their security protocols. More importantly, I know which of their allies are motivated by greed versus those who are driven by genuine political conviction." Over the following days, they developed a multi-phase plan that played to both their strengths. Astrid would use her political knowledge and noble connections to undermine the conspiracy from within, while Einar prepared to provide the military force necessary to protect her and ultimately rescue their daughter. The emotional complexity of their situation became most apparent during their quieter moments. Late at night, sitting before the fire, they would share memories. His of the daughter he had lost, hers of the child she had come to love without knowing her true identity. "She used to make me tell her the story of the brave princess who rescued her father from the dragon," Astrid said one evening, the wooden doll cradled in her hands. "I thought it was just a child's fascination with heroic tales. But now, you realize she was remembering fragments of the stories I used to tell her," Einar finished. "Sigrid always said I filled Astrid's head with too many tales of adventure and heroism." "Your wife, Sigrid, what was she like?" The question was painful, but necessary. If they were going to share the responsibility for their daughter's future, they needed to understand the woman whose place Astrid had unknowingly taken. Patient, wise. She could see the gentleness in me when all the world saw only the berserkers. Fury. Einar's voice grew soft with memory. "She used to say that Astrid had inherited my courage, but her mother's intelligence, and that combination would make her either a great leader or a terrible problem." "She sounds wonderful." "She was, and she would have approved of you, of how you've protected our daughter even without knowing the truth." He looked across the fire at Astrid, seeing not just the political refugee he had rescued, but the woman who had filled the role of mother to his lost child. Sigrid always believed that love was about choosing to care for someone every day, not just the accident of blood relation. These conversations deepened their connection beyond the practical alliance they had formed. By the time spring began to unlock the mountain passes, they had become partners in every sense, united by shared purpose, mutual respect, and a love for the same child that transcended traditional boundaries. Their final preparations took on an almost ritual significance. Einar taught Astrid advanced combat techniques, building on the natural skill she had demonstrated with bow and blade. She taught him the subtle arts of political manipulation and intelligence gathering. Most importantly, they rehearsed scenarios for their daughter's rescue, trying to anticipate every possible complication. She may not recognize you immediately, Astrid warned during one such planning session. 5 years is a lifetime to a child. She may be frightened, confused, even resistant to leaving the only family she's known recently. I know. The possibility was perhaps the most painful aspect of their entire plan. But I have to try. I have to give her the chance to remember who she really is. We both do, Astrid corrected. Whatever happens, whatever she chooses to remember or forget, she'll have both of us fighting for her. As they made their final preparations, intelligence began to reach them through Astrid's remaining network of loyal contacts. Grimwald was indeed preparing for their anticipated arrival, but he was also proceeding with the broader conspiracy, arranging marriages and alliances that would soon give him unprecedented power across the Northern Territories. He's accelerating. The timeline, Astrid realized after reading the latest coded message from one of her allies. Your involvement has made him nervous. He wants to complete the political consolidation before you can interfere. And then we'll have to move faster than he expects. There's more. She held up another message, her expression grim. Our daughter, they're planning to move her soon. Grimwald doesn't want her at his main stronghold when the final confrontations begin. He's sending her to a more remote location where she can be better protected or more easily disposed of if events turn against him. The news added urgency to their preparations, but it also presented an opportunity. A child being transported between strongholds would be more vulnerable than one locked away in Grimwald's main fortress. We intercept the convoy, Einar decided. Immediately. Take her before they reach the destination. It's risky. If we fail, they'll know we're actively hunting her, and they may decide she's more trouble than she's worth. And if we don't try, she disappears into whatever hole they're planning to hide her in. Einar's jaw set with determination. I lost her once because I wasn't there to protect her. I won't lose her again because I was too cautious to act. Their final night in the mountain lodge was spent in quiet preparation and reflection. They packed supplies, checked weapons, and reviewed their intelligence one final time. But as the hours passed toward dawn, both found themselves drawn to the simple comfort of each other's presence. Whatever happens out there, Astrid said as they sat before the dying fire. I want you to know that these weeks have been precious to me. Finding you, learning to trust again, discovering that there are still good people in the world. It's been a gift I didn't know I needed. For me, as well, Einar looked around the lodge that had been his sanctuary for 5 years. I came here to die, you know. Not quickly, but slowly, letting guilt and isolation consume me until there was nothing left. You gave me a reason to live again. We gave each other that. Outside, the first birds of spring were beginning to call, and the dawn light was growing. Stronger on the eastern peaks. Soon, they would leave this place of healing and transformation, venturing back into a world of politics and violence where their daughter waited in the hands of their enemies. But they would not go as the broken individuals who had found each other in the depths of winter. They would go as a family, united by love and purpose, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of their shared trials and the unshakable determination to reclaim what had been stolen from them. The convoy transporting their daughter moved along the mountain road 3 days earlier than Astrid's intelligence had predicted. Only the sharp eyes of her remaining contact in Grimwald's service prevented them from missing the opportunity entirely. The hastily delivered message reached them at dawn on what was supposed to be their final day of preparation, forcing immediate action instead of careful positioning. 6 mounted guards, 2 supply wagons, and a covered carriage, Astrid read from the coded missive. They're taking the old traders' route through Raven's Gap, traveling fast and trying to avoid the main roads. Einar was already moving, gathering weapons and supplies with the efficient haste of a veteran warrior. How long do we have? If they maintain their current pace, they'll reach the narrowest part of the pass by midday. After that, the road opens into farmland, where an ambush would be impossible. Then we intercept them at the gap. He shouldered his massive battle axe and secured his father's war horn at his belt. "Are you ready for this?" Astrid tested her bowstring one final time, then checked the placement of the knives concealed in her clothing. As ready as anyone can be for attacking a convoy that might be carrying their own child, they left the lodge at a run, following paths that Einar had memorized during his years in the mountains. The route to Raven's Gap was treacherous even, for experienced climbers, requiring them to traverse narrow ledges and scramble over loose rock faces. But it also offered the only practical ambush site for miles in any direction, a natural bottleneck where the road narrowed between towering glyph faces. As they climbed, both carried the weight of materials that had become almost sacred to them. Hidden in Einar's pack were the funeral pyre materials he had gathered weeks earlier, not in expectation of defeat, but in recognition that this battle might require the ultimate sacrifice. He had spent too many years running from death. Now he was prepared to embrace it if necessary to save his daughter. "There," Astrid pointed, as they crested a ridge overlooking the pass. "I can see the dust cloud from their horses." Below them, the convoy was exactly as described. 6 mounted warriors in mail hauberks, 2 heavy wagons laden with supplies, and in the center a covered carriage that bounced and swayed over the rough road surface. Even at this distance, they could hear the jingle of harness and the occasional shouted command from the convoy's leader. "I count 8 men total," Einar observed, studying the formation through narrowed eyes. "Professional soldiers, well-armed and alert. They know this is dangerous ground. Can you see her? Is she in the carriage? The covering is too thick, but look." He pointed to one of the riders who carried something tied to his saddle. "That's a child's traveling bundle. They have her." The confirmation sent ice through Astrid's veins, but also steel. Somewhere in that convoy, probably frightened and confused, was the little girl they had both come to love. The child who remembered stories of brave princesses and kind giants, who carried a wooden doll as her most precious possession, who asked daily for a mother she had been told would return soon. "We stay with the original plan," Einar decided. "I'll take the forward guards. You cover me from above and watch for any sign of her location. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong." Astrid's voice carried absolute conviction. "We've planned for every contingency, and we have something. They don't. We're fighting for love, not gold or political advantage." As the convoy entered the narrowest part of the pass, Einar positioned himself behind a massive boulder that would provide cover while allowing him to block the road completely. His size and the terrain meant that once he revealed himself, the mounted guards would have no choice but to fight. Retreat would be impossible in the confined space. The sound of his father's war horn echoing off the canyon walls announced his presence with a deep, resonant call that seemed to shake the very stones. The lead horses reared in terror at the sudden noise, and the convoy's careful formation dissolved into confusion as the guards fought to control their mounts while searching for the source of the attack. "I am Einar Bjornsson." His voice boomed across the pass, carrying the authority of a man who had faced death countless times. "I have come for my daughter." The lead guard, a scarred veteran with the bearing of a professional soldier, managed to steady his horse and draw his sword in one fluid motion. "Stand aside, berserker. We carry a child under Jarl Grimwald's protection." Protection. Einar's laugh was cold as winter wind. "You carry my daughter, stolen from her home 5 years past and used as a pawn in your master's games. Return her now, and you may leave this place alive." 1 man against 8. The guard's confidence was returning as he studied the tactical situation. Even Einar the Bear cannot fight such odds. Perhaps not. Einar stepped fully into view, his massive frame blocking the road like a gate of flesh and steel. "But I can try, and I will not stop trying until she is free or I am dead." The first attack came from 2 guards attempting to flank him, while the others held position. But the narrow confines of the pass worked to Einar's advantage, preventing them from using their superior numbers effectively. His battle-axe caught the sunlight as it swept in deadly arcs, and within moments both flanking riders were down, their horses screaming as they fled back down the road. From her position on the cliff face, Astrid had a clear view of the entire battle. Her arrows found their marks with deadly precision, picking off guards who tried to position themselves for clean attacks on Einar's exposed flanks. But more importantly, she could see movement inside the covered carriage, small hands pressing. Against the canvas, a child's face appearing briefly at a gap in the covering. "She's there," she called down to Einar. "Middle carriage, north side." The confirmation sent new fury through the berserker's veins. His daughter was mere yards away, probably terrified by the sounds of battle, watching strangers fight over her fate without understanding why. The protective rage that had driven him through years of hunting his family's killers blazed to full life, transforming him from a large man with an axe into the legendary warrior whose name was spoken in whispers. The remaining guards found themselves facing not just superior skill, but absolute determination. Einar fought with the focused intensity of a man who had already accepted death, making him infinitely more dangerous than opponents who still hoped to survive the encounter. His axe work was surgical in its precision, each blow calculated to disable or kill, while minimizing the risk to the child hidden in the carriage. When the convoy's leader finally fell, his sword broken and his life bleeding out on the mountain road, only silence remained, except for the sound of frightened horses and Einar's own labored breathing. 6 professional soldiers lay dead in the pass, their weapons scattered and their blood seeping into the ancient stone. But the victory came with a terrible cost. Einar had sustained multiple wounds during the fighting, sword cuts across his arms and torso, a spear thrust that had barely missed vital organs, and the accumulated damage of fighting outnumbered against skilled opponents. He leaned heavily on his axe as Astrid descended from her position, her own minor injuries forgotten in concern for his condition. "Can you move?" she asked, quickly assessing his wounds. "I can do whatever is necessary," but the strain in his voice suggested otherwise. Together, they approached the covered carriage, where their daughter waited. The silence from within was more frightening than screaming would have been. It suggested a child too terrified to make sound, or worse, one who had been harmed during the fighting. "Little one," Astrid called softly through the canvas. "We've come to take you home. You're safe now." A small voice answered from within, barely audible but filled with confusion and fear. "Mama, is that really you?" Astrid pulled back the canvas covering with trembling hands, revealing the small figure huddled inside the carriage. The child who looked up at them was unmistakably the daughter they had both fought to save. Golden hair in 2 neat braids, bright blue eyes wide with fear and confusion, and clutched in her small arms the same wooden doll that had triggered Astrid's first recovered memory weeks ago. "Mama!" The little girl launched herself into Astrid's arms with the desperate relief of a child who had been brave for too long. "I knew you would come. They said you were gone forever, but I knew you would find me." As Astrid held the sobbing child, Einar felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. This was his daughter, his Astrid, but she had no recognition for him at all. 5 years of captivity had stolen her memory of her birth father, replacing it with love for the woman who had unknowingly taken her dead mother's place. "Shh, little one," Astrid whispered, stroking the child's hair. "I'm here now. We're both here." "Both?" The girl pulled back slightly, noticing Einar for the first time. Her eyes widened as she took in his massive frame and blood-stained clothing. "Who is the big man, Mama? Why is he hurt?" Before Astrid could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed from both ends of the pass. The convoy's failure to reach its destination had been noted, and reinforcements were coming from multiple directions. Einar forced himself upright, hefting his axe despite the pain from his wounds. "We need to move," he said grimly. "They'll trap us in this pass if we delay." "Can you travel?" Astrid asked, still holding their daughter close. "I can do what must be done, But as he took a step, fresh blood soaked through his makeshift bandages. The wounds were worse than he had admitted, and the exertion of battle had reopened injuries that needed proper care. As they gathered what supplies they could from the convoy, the child, whose name they still didn't know, watched Einar with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You're bleeding," she said quietly, her small voice carrying unexpected authority. "It's nothing that won't heal," Einar replied gently. "Mama says that healing takes time and patience." The girl studied his face with disturbing intensity. "She also says that sometimes people come back to us when we think they're gone forever." Astrid felt a chill of recognition at the words. "Did someone teach you that, little one, about people coming back?" "I taught myself. I remember." The child frowned, pressing her small hands to her temples, as if trying to grasp something just beyond reach. "I remember big hands that were gentle, and a voice that told stories about brave princesses, and I remember being carried on shoulders that felt as tall as mountains." Einar's breath caught in his throat. Despite everything, the years of captivity, the lies she had been told, the new identity that had been forced upon her, some part of his daughter still remembered him. "What else do you remember?" he asked softly, kneeling despite his injuries. To bring himself closer to her eye level, stories about a princess who had to save her papa from the bad men who took him away. And something about she looked up at him with sudden, startling recognition. "Papa!" The word hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, the pain of his wounds was nothing compared to the overwhelming joy and relief of being remembered by his lost daughter. But their reunion was interrupted by the growing sound of pursuit, horses and armed men approaching from both directions, boxing them into the narrow pass. "We can't outrun them," Astrid said, quickly assessing their tactical situation. "Not with your injuries and a child to protect. Then we don't run." Einar struggled to his feet, his daughter's recognition giving him strength he didn't know he possessed. "We make our stand here." "Against how many?" 20 men, 30, however many it takes. He looked down at the little girl who stood between them, her small hand now clasping each of theirs with perfect trust. "She knows who I am now. That changes everything." From her hiding place in Astrid's bodice, the royal signet ring, forgotten in the chaos of battle, suddenly seemed to pulse with significance. As the sound of approaching enemies grew louder, Astrid remembered something crucial about her true identity and the authority it carried. "Wait," she said, pulling out the ring with sudden inspiration. "I've been thinking about this all wrong. We don't need to fight them. We need to stop them from fighting us." She placed the signet ring on her finger, and immediately her bearing changed. Gone was the refugee they had been hunting. In her place stood a noblewoman whose bloodline carried legal authority that even Jarl Grimwald would be forced to acknowledge. "I am Astrid Bjornsdottir, daughter of Jarl Bjorn the Wise, keeper of the mountain passes." Her voice rang with the authority of her birthright as the first riders appeared at the mouth of the pass. "I claim right of protection for this child, and formal accusation against Jarl Grimwald for theft, conspiracy, and the murder of innocent families." The lead rider, a different man from the convoy guards, clearly an officer of higher rank, pulled up short at her declaration. The sight of her signet ring, combined with her obvious noble bearing, gave him pause. Even in a lawless age, certain formalities had to be observed when dealing with accusations between noble houses. "My lady," he said carefully, "Jarl Grimwald claims legal guardianship of this child through right of conquest and political alliance. Your accusations are supported by evidence that will destroy not just Grimwald, but every noble family involved in this conspiracy." Astrid held up the blood-stained map, making sure it was visible to all the riders. "This child is not a spoil of war or a political pawn. She is Astrid Einarsdottir, daughter of a murdered family, stolen from her home and used as leverage against me for 2 years." The officer's expression changed as he recognized the implications of what she was saying. A child stolen from a massacred family was a very different matter from a noble ward being transferred between houses. Such crimes carried blood debt that could be claimed by any surviving family member. "And who claims blood right for this child?" he asked, though his eyes had already found Einar. "I do." Einar's voice carried across the pass with the authority of absolute conviction. "I am Einar Bjornsson, called the Bear, and this is my daughter. She was taken when her mother died in Grimwald's raid 5 years past. I claim blood debt against all who participated in her theft and captivity." The officer looked between the three of them, the wounded berserker, the noble lady with her damning evidence, and the child who clung to both of them with obvious love and trust. The political calculations were complex, but the legal reality was simple. Blood debt overrode almost every other consideration in Norse law. "Stand down," he called to his men. "This matter requires judgment from higher authority than mine." "Coward!" came a shout from the rear of the formation. "They've killed 8 of our men. They must answer for... They will answer!" The officer cut him off. "But in a court of law, not on a battlefield. These accusations are too serious to be settled with swords." As the immediate threat of violence receded, their daughter looked up at both her parents with the wisdom of a child who had seen too much of the world's cruelty. "Are we safe now?" she asked quietly. "We're together," Astrid replied. "And that's what matters most. All 3 of us," Einar added, his voice rough with emotion as he looked at his daughter, the child he had lost and found again, who had grown up calling another woman mother, but still remembered the father who had once carried her on shoulders as tall as mountains. The battle was over, but the larger war, the fight for justice, for their family's future, and for the right to heal old wounds, was just beginning. 3 months after the confrontation at Raven's Gap, the mountain lodge had been transformed from a hermit's refuge into a true family home. The changes were subtle but profound. Children's drawings adorning the walls, a smaller chair carved to fit at the great wooden table, and the constant sound of laughter echoing through rooms that had known only silence for too many years. Einar sat by the fire, his wounds finally healed enough to allow full movement, watching as their daughter practiced her letters on a piece of slate. She had chosen to keep the name Astrid, declaring with the practical wisdom of childhood that having 2 people with the same name in a family just meant there was twice as much love to go around. Her memories had returned gradually, fragments of her life before the raid mixing with her years of captivity to create a complete, if complex, understanding of her own story. "Tell me again about Mama Sigrid," she said, looking up from her writing practice. It had become her favorite request. During their evening hours together, "Your birth mother was the wisest woman I ever knew," Einar began, settling into the familiar rhythm of the story. "She could heal any hurt with her hands, solve any problem with her mind, and she loved you more than all the stars in the sky. And Mama Astrid loves me just as much," the child added with satisfaction. "So I have 2 mothers who love me, even though one is with the gods now." "That's exactly right." Astrid entered from the lodge's addition they had built to accommodate their expanded family, carrying the child's embroidered scarf, the artifact that had become the symbol of their successful reunion. The scarf had been found among the personal effects confiscated from Grimwald's stronghold after his arrest, one of many pieces of evidence that had brought justice to the conspiracy that had torn apart so many families. The legal proceedings that followed their confrontation had been complex but decisive. Astrid's evidence, combined with testimony from other victims of the marriage conspiracy, had resulted in the dissolution of multiple forced betrothals and the redistribution of lands that had been seized through political manipulation. Jarl Grimwald himself now resided in a royal prison, awaiting execution for crimes that included murder, theft, conspiracy against the crown, and the systematic abuse of noble marriage laws. "The messenger came today," Astrid announced, settling beside them with a scroll bearing official seals. The king has confirmed the final judgments. All of them? Einar asked. All of them. The families who lost children have been reunited. The forced marriages have been annulled. The conspirators' lands have been redistributed to their victims. She smiled with deep satisfaction. Justice has been served, and the political threat has been eliminated. Their daughter looked up from her writing. Does this mean the bad men can't hurt anyone else? That's exactly what it means, little one, Astrid assured her. The bad men have been stopped, and the good people are safe now. Because Papa fought them, and you were smart enough to prove they were bad? Because we worked together, Einar corrected gently. Your Mama's intelligence and my strength, combined with the help of many good people who wanted to do what was right. The child nodded solemnly, then returned to her slate with the focused attention of someone practicing an important skill. She was learning to read and write in multiple scripts, the practical education of a mountain dweller combined with the classical learning befitting her noble birth. Most importantly, she was learning the stories of her heritage from both sides of her complicated family. As evening deepened into night, they followed the routines that had developed naturally over their months together. Einar banked the fire, while Astrid helped their daughter prepare for bed. The child insisted on her nightly ritual of kissing both parents goodnight and whispering her thanks to the gods for bringing her family back together. "Sweet dreams, little star," Astrid whispered, tucking the embroidered scarf around the child's shoulders like a blanket. "Dream of brave princesses and gentle giants," Einar added, settling the wooden doll, now carefully repaired and repainted, in the crook of her arm. When their daughter was asleep, Einar and Astrid stepped outside to enjoy the clear mountain air and discuss the future that stretched before them. The political crisis that had brought them together was resolved, but the bonds they had forged in the crucible of shared struggle had proven stronger than mere convenience or circumstance. "King's messenger brought something else," Astrid said, producing a second scroll from her robes. "A formal offer of position at court, advisor on noble family disputes and political marriage law. The experience I gained fighting this conspiracy has made me valuable to the crown. Will you accept? That depends on whether a certain mountain hermit would be willing to leave his refuge and rejoin the world." She studied his face in the starlight. "The position comes with lands, a proper household, and the kind of resources that could give our daughter every advantage in life." Einar was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer and its implications. For 5 years, these mountains had been his sanctuary, the place where he had learned to live with loss and found a different kind of strength than the berserker's fury. Now they represented something new, not escape from the world, but preparation for returning to it with wisdom instead of rage. "I swore once that I would never again use violence for personal gain," he said finally. "But fighting to protect the innocent, using strength in service of justice, that feels like a different oath entirely." The king's letter mentions the need for a marshal to oversee the enforcement of the new marriage laws, someone with the authority to investigate complaints and the capability to act when local officials prove insufficient. She smiled at him. "Apparently, word has spread about how effectively Einar the Bear can resolve complex political situations. And our daughter, what kind of life would court offer her? The best of both worlds, I think. Education and opportunity, but also the values we've taught her about choosing love over convenience, courage over comfort." Astrid took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "She's already learned the most important lessons, that families are made by choice and commitment, not just blood, and that sometimes the greatest strength comes from protecting others instead of conquering them." Inside the lodge, their daughter stirred in her sleep, murmuring words that might have been a prayer or simply the remnants of happy dreams. The sound made both adults smile, reminded of what they had accomplished together and what they still hope to achieve. "When do we need to decide?" Einar asked. "The messenger will wait until morning for our answer." Astrid leaned against his shoulder, content in the warmth of his presence and the security of their shared future. But I think we both know what that answer will be. He nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further words. They had found each other in the depths of winter, two broken people seeking redemption in isolation. They had discovered that healing required not just solitude, but connection, not just peace, but the courage to fight for what mattered most. Tomorrow, they would begin preparing for a new life, one that honored the past while embracing the future. Their daughter would grow up knowing both her heritage as a berserker's child and her destiny as a noble lady, understanding that true strength came from protecting others, and that real nobility was measured in service rather than privilege. The mountain wind carried the promise of spring's full arrival, and with it the certainty that some stories end not with endings, but with new beginnings. In the lodge behind them, a child slept peacefully, surrounded by the artifacts of her reclaimed identity. The wooden doll that remembered love, the embroidered scarf that proved survival, and the parents who had chosen each other and her with deliberate, enduring devotion. The giant Viking had saved a woman left to die in the snow. The woman had saved him from a life of lonely penance. Together, they had saved their daughter from those who would use children as weapons. And in saving each other, they had discovered that the most powerful force in any saga is not the strength of a warrior's arm or the cunning of a politician's mind, but the decision to love someone enough to fight for them, protect them, and choose them again every single day. Their story had become legend in the mountain communities, the tale of how love could triumph over conspiracy, how justice could emerge from personal tragedy, and how the choice to help a stranger could transform everyone involved. But for the three people sleeping peacefully in the mountain lodge, it was simply the story of how a family found each other when each had thought they were beyond saving. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, and the mountains stood as witness to the truth that some bonds transcend blood, circumstance, and time itself.